Hello everyone, and welcome to the last part of this section, all about architecture and design. And this is our Donation X code walkthrough version 3. So we're just going to have a look at our third version of Donation, where we bring in and apply the MVVM pattern and bring in our view model, our live data, and kind of look at how we can refactor the code from the developer's perspective. Again, the feature set from the user's point of view won't be that much different, but there will be quite a substantial change to the design of the app, and then we will use this design going forward for the rest of the versions of Donation. Okay, so I'm going to break it down as follows, the agenda. So again, have a quick look at our project structure. We'll have a look at the view-ViewModel Communication. Okay, and we'll use a couple of use cases to demonstrate that. We'll also look at a bit of data binding, and then, as I say, the relevant code extracts to try and explain and talk through and go into a little bit more detail about what you will be looking at in the lab while you're doing it. Okay. So if we look at the project structure, this is what we have at the moment. So again, it's auto-generated by Android Studio, right, and refactored with existing code base. So what we've done a bit of chopping and changing, as they say. So we would have, in the lab, we would have got you to start with the nav drawer template, and then we will bring in the existing code that we have. Okay. So if you notice what we have over here in our overall Donation X package, there's activities, we have the adapters. So again, we're going to look at that because that's important in terms of what we'll be using in some of the code we look at. We have our application object in the main package. We have our models, and then with the wizard we would have got this overall UI package. And as I would have mentioned in previous sections, previous videos, the way Android Studio does it, it tries to couple together the fragment, like your view, and then the view model element. So whatever the features that you might want to have in your overall application, this is what we're doing. So we have our separate kind of about screen. We're going to have a detail screen, so kind of for editing and eventually in looking at more detail about the donation that was made. There's kind of the original donate and then the report. So we will focus on the detail and the report fragments, the report view model, donation detail and report view models, just to try and demonstrate the inner workings of these new components that we're bringing in into our overall application. Okay. So as I said, we'll start with reports. So we'll look at MVVM in reports. So again, the view and view model communication and how we go about displaying our donations. Okay. So again, a quick recap. And just hide myself there and present. Okay. So we want to add our donations. We can click on the add button there. We get what we want. We have our hamburger menu up top to navigate between the different options, and then we have our, as I said, that's the kind of the main donate screen. We have our report screen, is pretty basic at the moment, just a placeholder for images and just displaying an amount and a payment type. Okay, so to delve a little bit deeper into how that's now displayed and how we communicate between our data and our views, right, with and after applying the MVVM is as follows. Okay, so to begin with, we have something along these lines. We have our report view model. So as I say, extending from view model, taking the recommended approach where we have the raw data, so to speak, which accesses our donation model. Or creates a list, a donation model list, but it's mutable. So we have mutable live data. Okay, and then we expose the public observable donations list with a get accessor, which will just return that donations list. Okay, so this is how we'll access it through, and we'll observe donations, the observable donations list object. But look, again, you don't have to. If you want to cut down on your code, you could actually make that public, but again, you're kind of going slightly against the recommended approach. And very similar to the example that we had, when we initialize our report view model and we get an instance of one, we will call this load function initially, hence inside our init block. And what that does is that assigns to the value property of our mutable data donations list, which is this one up here, donations lists, right? Our donation manager dot find all. So again, this is going back to our kind of interface, so to speak, and our find all will retrieve a list of our donations. Okay. So if we have a look inside the onCreate view, and again, this is slightly different because this is inside a fragment as opposed to an activity. So we're not working with onCreate, we're actually working with the onCreate view. Okay, hang on, just changing my color there again. Okay, so again, just there's one point to note, it's inside our onCreate view, and again, the view binding is a little bit different as well. Okay, so just make a note of that. We would have touched on this back in previous sections, but again, just be aware that it's a little bit different, and that the approach taken when implementing view binding in fragments. Okay, so here we are. This one is just setting up the linear layout manager. Here's the important bits for us. Here we are getting an instance of our report view model via the view model provider. Okay, and here we are now, and because this is inside a fragment, we have to pass in the view lifecycle owner implicit object there. In previous examples, because we were inside an activity, we just passed into this reference because obviously the activity was part of the lifecycle. But because a fragment lives inside an activity, the correct reference is our view lifecycle owner. So that's getting passed in there. There's our observer. And similar to the example, what we do is we observe the public live data, our observable donations list, and when our donation changes, we call render on that data, that list of donations that has now changed, and we pass it to our render function. We'll look at that now in a minute, what that does. But this is what we're observing inside the report fragment. Okay. We also have a on-click listener attached to the floating action button. So if the user clicks on the button, what we do is we create an action there, tied it to our navigation component. So again, all this is looked after for us. We don't have to create a new fragment transaction. We don't have to name it individually. We don't have to have the call the dot commit to cause the transaction to happen. It's all done through the navigation component and a report fragment directions dot action report fragment to donate fragment. This is what we would have got by default. You could and can change this in the navigation component itself if you go to that within Android Studio itself. I'm just taking what was supplied to us, but as I said, you can change it if you need to. And then we use our FindNav controller to navigate and jump off to that particular fragment. So these couple of lines of code here will ensure that if the user clicks on the floating action button to add a new donation, we are automatically via the navigation component taken to the donate fragment. And again, we're just using the default function itself. It was when we added the fragments within the navigation component itself. It gave us that method itself, which will automatically create a transaction, commit it, and if necessary, pass any parameters. We're not here now at the minute, but we will later on. We will see that, and jump off to that other fragment that we need, which is our donate fragment. Okay. The render itself to display the data is as follows. So here we are inside render. So we're passing in this donations list. So remember, this is the live data value that was updated because some change has been made to the list. Okay. Or whatever the existing list happens to be. So we create our adapter, passing in that list, and we just have some extra checks going on there. If it's empty, just display the visibility that just the recycler view will either display it or not, and display a donations not found. But again, not too difficult to kind of grasp. A simple displaying and assigning of our donation adapter, where we've passed in our donations list, assigning it to our through the view binding, the fragment, the recycler view adapter property within the layout itself. Okay. If we look at the adapter, or internally inside the adapter itself, a little bit extra going on. So inside the bind, okay, so what we're now, because we're using our view binding here, right, we're assigning, and again, this is why this is great, because we're not actually getting in at the individual properties anymore. We are assigning, and we'll look at that now in the next few slides, we are updating the donation data element that we have inserted into the layout with the individual donation that has been passed to our main holder class and internally inside the bind function to attach our data from the donation, the raw data donation, and display them in the layout via data binding. Okay. We also do the same with the image, just setting it default. We will actually kind of refer back to this again. We'll be changing this, and we actually assign a click listener on our interface so that when we click on our on that row, we can actually go into our kind of edit. Okay, and that's why the donation. But we're kind of focusing on this is the kind of the more relevant line of code at the moment. So we've done away with the individual assignment, getting at the data. We're now using our data binding to update declaratively, as we'll see it in the layout next, our donation object. So there's one assignment, the whole donation been assigned to the donation that we are accessing in the layout. So in the layout itself, something like this. So again, inside your layout tag, you have your data tag. We're calling it donation. So again, just make sure it matches. That donation maps back to the binding.donation. Specifying the correct type. It's our donation model. And then inside the individual layouts themselves, we get something like this. There's our payment amount. Again, hasn't changed from the first version of donation. What has changed now is this here. Here we are, as we saw in previous examples as well in the last section, getting at the donation.amount property, converting it to a string using our integer class, and assigning it then in the text field, or text property, should I say. And we do the same with the other text view as well. So anytime there's any changes made, that will be automatically updated for us. Okay. In terms of the detail, so again, data binding and displaying a donation. So this is where the data binding really comes into its own in terms of looking at details and ultimately, I guess, down the line, our edit properties. Okay. So again, actually, sorry to come back to there now again. Or just hide myself, you can see that there's our floating action button. So what we're looking at now is when we want to click on an individual row and go off and look at the particular detail of a donation. So okay, so we get something like this. Okay, and notice again, just because this is not a root element, the detail, we don't have the hamburger menu. We have our navigate back to it, the kind of the parent screen, I guess. Okay. So how that works as follows. So here's our view model. We'll always kind of start with the view models. So our donation detail view model again keeps track of an individual donation. Okay, so there's our mutable live data. Here we are exposing the public read-only observable donation, and we have one function called get donation that will take an ID and update the donation value, which is again is our mutable data that we're keeping track of, observing, with our call to our interface, our .find by ID, passing in the ID of the donation that we want to get. Okay, so again, quite small, not much going on, just one function there, get. We may come back to these and we may revisit these in later versions, but for the moment, all we want to do is get at the donation to display. Okay, so then inside our donation detail, so again, it's inside our onCreateView again. Here we are binding, using our view binding. Here we are getting a reference, an instance of our detail view model. And here we are observing the individual donation. And again, all we need is a single render. We don't need to pass in any parameters in this case. And what we have here is, here we are setting the text initially to a message, setting the upvotes to 0, because we weren't working with those properties just yet. But here we are, this is the relevant line of code for the moment. Here we are assigning our detail view model to the donation VM, as I'm referring to it, that we would have passed into and referencing declaratively inside the layer. So whenever there are any changes inside our detail view model, because we are observing the live data, the observable donation, which is an individual donation element, when that changes, we simply trigger this call here, which in turn we use our data binding to assign that now up-to-date synchronized detail view model to the donation VM that we're referring to it in at the layout. So very similar to the previous example. If we have a look at our layout here we are referring to it again, the data tag inside our donation VM, and there it is. We're just accessing that it's the donation detail view model that we're working with this time. Okay, so that allows us obviously to assign one to the other, and then inside the layout itself we can do something like this. So inside the edit text, so again there it is, like there's our edit amount, there's our conversion again, just getting at the within the donation VM the observable donation and its amount field. And I think actually that's it for that little bit there, but I suppose it's there's not a huge amount to it. All it is, it's all the declarative code here. Okay, so that will tie back directly to the amount of the observable donation element that's inside your inside the donation VM. Just another way of accessing it. You may not have seen that before, but it's just another approach. Okay, so obviously if you're working through the lab, there's a lot more in it. We would go through in detail all the properties and all the changes that you need to make. But this, I suppose the important point to note with this is, because we're using our data binding here, we can actually apply two-way data binding, like as I would have mentioned in other sections, what you would see in the web world. So even though this is only read-only at the moment, with very little changes, we would be able to implement our edit features in later versions. Okay, so we will kind of revisit this again when we get to the adding in that kind of edit and delete features and a few other features as well as the versions go by. Okay, so again, just a quick summary there. We looked at project structure, our View-ViewModel Communication, the data binding we're just focusing on there, and again, all done declaratively, all done through the layout and in the corresponding code extracts. Okay, so if you've any questions or any issues with that, or any issues with the lab as you're working through it as well, you can get me on Slack, you can get me over email. But other than that, thanks for listening, and goodbye.